computer. And okay, we are live. Good evening, sir. Erev Tov.
Yes, good evening,
Yeah.
Father Kyle.
Oh, okay. Like, well,
Yeah, you're a father, right?
I know. Yeah, it's taking a minute to sink in.
Yep, pretty awesome.
It's pretty great. Yeah, and now
Yep.
he's smiling and stuff. So
Oh, man. Yeah, I wish I could have seen him laughing away yesterday, but
yeah, it was pretty good.
yeah, that is good.
Cool. So Messi Gents, episode I think 14. There's so many now, I've lost track, but it's written down online, so it's 14 or 15. But we're making some headway. And tonight we'll be doing Genesis chapter 5.
You bet.
All right. So I have the Tanakh, everyone, that I'll be reading from, which is the Hebrew Bible, and I will try not to butcher the names. I don't think we have too many tough ones tonight, but for those people that know that I'm getting some of the names wrong, take it easy. I'm very sensitive.
Don't beat you up.
All right. So here we go. So Genesis chapter 5, verse 1. In Ty,
Yeah.
should I read the whole thing or stop halfway
Yeah.
through?
No, let's go all the way through this one, I think.
Okay. All right. Yeah, it's not too long.
So unless you get really inspired somewhere in the middle,
Good. Okay. So it says, this is the account of the descendants of Adam. On the day that God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. He created them male and female. He blessed them and called their name man on the day they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he begot in his likeness and his image, and he named him Seth. And the days of Adam after begetting Seth were 800 years, and he begat sons and daughters. All the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. Seth lived 105 years and begot Enosh. And Seth lived 807 years after begetting Enosh, and he begat sons and daughters. All the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. Enosh lived 90 years and begat Kenan. And Enosh lived 815 years after begetting Kenan, and he begat sons and daughters. All the days of Enosh were 905 years, and he died. Kenan lived 70 years and begat Mahalalel. And Kenan lived 840 years after begetting Mahalalel, and he begat sons and daughters. All the days of Kenan were 910 years, and he died. I'm just going to pause there real quick because as people are listening to me read, it's just names, genealogy, how long they lived. And there's actually some to this. So we'll get through it and then we'll unpack why this is important.
Yeah. And how could they possibly live that long, right?
Exactly. Okay. So verse 15, Mahalalel lived 65 years and begot Jared. And Mahalalel lived 830 years after begetting Jared, and he begot sons and daughters. All the days of Mahalalel were 895 years, and he died. Jared lived 162 years and begat Enoch. And Jared lived 800 years after begetting Enoch, and he begat sons and daughters. All the days of Jared came to 962 years, and he died. Enoch lived 65 years and begat Methuselah. Enoch walked with God for 300 years, and after begetting Methuselah, and he begat sons and daughters. All the days of Enoch were 365 years. And Enoch walked with God. Then he was no more, for God had taken him. Methuselah lived 187 years and begot Lamech. Now I saw you look up. Did you want me to stop there for a second?
Well, I just want everybody that's listening, and because I know you and I have talked about this, you notice that guy, it doesn't say that he died.
Correct.
Yep. Okay. Just an interesting point. Yep. So now his son Methuselah.
Yep. Methuselah lived 187 years and begot Lamech. And Methuselah lived 782 years after begetting Lamech, and he begot sons and daughters. All the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. Man, he almost made it to 1,000.
Yeah.
Lamech lived
He had an
100.
interesting death too.
What's that?
He had an interesting death, at least the timing of it too. But anyway, sorry.
All right. Yeah, we're almost done. We'll come back to everything. Okay. Verse 28. Lamech lived 182 years and begot a son. And he called his name Noah, saying, "This one will bring us rest from our work and from the toil of our hands, from the ground which Hashem had cursed." And Hashem is Lord for anyone who's reading a non Hebrew Bible. Lamech lived 595 years after begetting Noah, and he begot sons and daughters. All the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. When Noah was 500 years old, Noah begot Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
There you go.
There you go.
This is leading us up to the flood. So,
indeed.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go back. So what's interesting is how this bloodline that we're following now, of Adam to Seth and to his children, and how that bloodline plays out in the New Testament with the bloodline of Jesus. You know, I think it's in Matthew. No, it's not Matthew.
By the way, I'm going to actually be taking some notes down as we're speaking from now on, because it's going to be a lot easier for me to add them to the description of the video.
Okay. Yep.
So if you see me, that's what I'm doing.
All right. Trying to think of the other gospel. It must be Mark.
You want me to pause it?
Well, just a second here, and I'll I'm here flipping the pages. Yeah, I hit pause.
Okay. All right, we're back.
Okay. Yeah, in Matthew, it just picks it up from Abraham, the bloodline, the people. But what's interesting here is now we're even when these guys lived to be 900 and some years old, they still died. You know, so they're still paying the penalty of sin. You know, the wages of sin is death, right? So it doesn't matter how long you live, eventually you are going to die. And it's kind of interesting today, you know, with all the artificial intelligence programs that they transgender that they want to put into people, you know.
Transhumanism.
Huh?
Transhumanism.
Yeah, I said transgender, didn't I? Yeah, transhumanism. Sorry. And trying to make them to be people to live 300 years, you know. Okay. Well, you're still going to die, you know, still going to suffer the wages of sin. There is an interesting verse in 1 Corinthians 15. I'm sorry, 1 Corinthians 15:45. And here he talks about Adam, and he does it in relating him to Jesus. And he says, Paul says here, if there is a natural body, there is also a spiritual body. So it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being, and the last Adam, a life-giving spirit. Okay? So he's calling Jesus the last Adam, or the second Adam. So you've got this first Adam that brought human life to earth, right? And then we all receive our life from him. we're all descended from him. Well, then he's saying, so Jesus came along to bring spiritual life, a new life, a second life, born again, like he talked with Nicodemus. And so that's why he's calling Jesus the second Adam, because he's the first, right, of all who will be resurrected from the dead. So he says in 46, the spiritual did not come first, but the natural, right? The natural Adam that we're talking about. And after that, the spiritual one came. The first man was of the dust of the earth, right, Adam? And the second man was from heaven, as was the earthly man. So are those who are of the earth. And as is the man from heaven, so are those who are of heaven. So isn't that interesting? So if you're the earthly Adam created earthly people, right? And so this spiritual Adam, Jesus, is creating heavenly people. Okay? Whole nother, and it should be just as natural. We naturally follow Adam, the sinful Adam, right? Well, we ought to naturally follow Jesus, the second Adam, once we're born again. But that doesn't seem to be the case, does it?
Hey, what chapter and verse is that?
That's 1 Corinthians 15:45
1 Corinthians.
is where I started.
1 Corinthians 15, verse 45.
Yep. And then I'm right now, verse 49 says, and just as we have borne the likeness of the earthly man, right? So we're just like Adam, right? So shall we bear the likeness of the man from heaven. Interesting, isn't it? It also, it tells you how we should be acting, right? If we're supposed to live and breathe and talk and squeak and everything like Jesus.
Yep.
And so there's a challenge right there. It also leads me to when we get our resurrected body, after we're dead and Jesus comes and raises us from the dead. When he spoke with Thomas, so when he was risen from the grave, and then he was here on earth for 40 days after that, before he ascended to heaven. And one occasion he's talking with Thomas, and of course Thomas doubts whether that's really Jesus or not. Right. And he says to Thomas, he says, feel me. He says, touch my arm. I am flesh and bone. I'm not a spirit. Isn't that interesting? So what that means is that when we have our resurrected bodies, we are going to be like Jesus. And it says it right here, right? I'll read it again. And just as we have borne the likeness of the earthly man, so we shall bear the likeness of the man from heaven. Right. So even Jesus, resurrected, is flesh and bone.
So how does this tie in with what we're reading right here?
Well, I think that's interesting is that this flesh and bone in the beginning that we're reading about dies because of sin. Right. But now that the second Adam, Jesus, has come, this flesh and bone will live for be an eternal being. Right. Will still be flesh and bone. Right? So this process that Jesus has begun in us, those that believe, is really a return to what Adam was before he sinned. That's it. I find that interesting.
Yep. Is
what we're going back to.
Right. And so how come these guys live so long?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. So there's several theories about that. I'll bring up one that's interesting, and that is that when the earth was formed and was obviously had all this moisture on it, this water, and it was very hot. Basically, you could think of it like it's boiling or steaming, it's cooling off. And so this steam is rising into the atmosphere. And when it did that, as it hit the cold atmosphere, it started to freeze. Okay. And so the theory, the idea, which is not provable, just an idea, is that the earth was actually surrounded by a ball of ice. So the earth was spinning, but around it was this it's like we were inside of a ball. Basically, the earth was inside of a ball, and that ball was made out of ice. And so what that did was an interesting thing. One thing, if it's true, we're just following the logic of it, is that if when the sun was directing its light towards the earth, it would be diffracted, refracted, spread all over evenly around the earth. And so that would allow for like jungle-like vegetation to be growing in the North Pole or the South Pole, where they find things like that. And the other thing it did is it kept the temperature of the earth relatively the same everywhere, because it wasn't just concentrated on the equator. It was spread out because of the ice. So vegetation could, it would be like being inside of a greenhouse, really, and so things could just grow very rapidly, and I'm just, as I'm talking to you, it seemed like there'd be a little bit of light everywhere all the time, like it would never really get dark, if that light's bouncing around like that, because the sun is always shining on a part of the earth somewhere, right? Well, and then as the theory goes, is that this sun, of course, most of the energy is focused on the center of this ball of ice. And so over time, right, it's wearing thinner and thinner, because that's where the light is directed, the most heat. And so eventually that ball of ice melts through. And when it did, that's when it fell down on the North and the South Pole. Okay.
Interesting.
Which is going to lead us into chapter 6, the flood. Okay. And so I guess it'll prepare us for that. But and then the idea is that the earth was on a rotating on a straight up axis, and it actually went tipped, and then it came back. I think we're at a 23 degree or something like that now, angle that we spin on. Well, that would dump all the oceans immediately. If you took it and went like that and brought it back, the oceans would just empty, right? And so anyway, those are the thoughts that can lead us up into the next chapter of the flood.
That is an interesting concept. But how does that make somebody live 900 years?
Yeah, well, because of the protection. Okay, all of the rays of the sun that are harmful to us, see, were all blocked. They couldn't get through the ice because of in other words, the atmosphere was much thicker, and so we were protected from all of that stuff coming through. That's just an idea.
Okay, we'll put that in the maybe category or column.
Yeah. Well, I would put it into probably not column, but it's a great story. It also explains why they're finding woolly mammoths in the way northern areas, which surprises them that they're up there, but they're finding them with green grass in their mouth and in their stomachs, like they were frozen instantaneously. Right. And so if it did melt through, if that theory is correct, and that ice came down, it'd be all slushy on the inside, and it would have just encased whatever was under it immediately in ice.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it all fits, but it does not mean it's true.
Right.
But
And
it's a story.
so for that, okay. So, and what is it? Does that theory have a name?
I'm sure it does, but I have no clue. I heard it so long ago. I bet it was 30 years ago, maybe 40 years ago. It was a long time ago.
Okay.
So
I didn't think you were that old.
well, yeah, I'm 42. So my mother told it to me when I was
2.
2.
Okay. And so that's one theory.
Okay, maybe not.
Are there
Yeah.
any other theories?
Well, the way they ate, they would have eaten just natural foods. They wouldn't have been eating the processed food that we eat today. The earth was younger, and everything was cleaner. There was no pollution, right? All kinds of things they had going for them. And oxygen levels, they think that the oxygen level on the earth was higher then. And I think they can prove that. One thing I read a few years back, what's that? I should have my grandson here. What's the dinosaur that flies?
A pterodactyl?
Pterodactyls. Yeah. They've done some studies on pterodactyls, and with the I think you can Google this and look this up, but the oxygen level that's in the air today, a pterodactyl could not fly. There's not enough oxygen in the air to support it. So, really interesting. And so they're using things like that to prove that there was a higher oxygen level back in the day, way back. And that for sure kills disease, limits the travel of viruses and all that kind of stuff.
So is that why when we were down in the Negev that we felt so good?
Yeah, and especially in the Dead Sea. Remember when we were at the beach?
Yep.
Yeah, because it's just the opposite. You're 1,350 feet below sea level, so it's the opposite effect as being up high in the mountains where you can hardly breathe and you feel lightheaded. Well, when you're there and you're down below sea level, it's the opposite. You've got more atmospheric pressure, a little more oxygen. Yeah, you do. You feel good. You can actually feel it.
Yep.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Well, I know we're not there yet, but also at some point, God says, I can't put up with these guys this long. I'm going to narrow their life expectancy to 120 years.
Well, it'll be interesting when we read that. It actually, if you read that closely, what it means is in 120 years, he was going to bring judgment.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So he was giving them 120 years to repent.
Ah, okay. So then it doesn't mean what I'm saying it means.
Well, yeah, I know what you think it is, and I've heard people say that, but when we read that next time in chapter 6, we'll discuss it. That'll be a good discussion.
Okay, cool. Because I think about it. If you think about it, there are more and more people living over 100 and 120, although it's way out there, and maybe a lot of people don't make it, but that is still totally tangible today.
Yeah, I was just, I don't know, I listened to some infomercial today about, they've got some new secret product to make you live longer. Anyway, they showed some guys that are 120 years old.
Yeah, goji berries, those help.
What is it?
Goji berries. I think so.
Dingleberries?
Goji, Goji. And the people were that are around, I think they naturally grow in Asia somewhere. And the people, that live around those and pick those and eat it, where that's just like part of, it's like going outside and picking blueberries or whatever.
Okay.
They all live super, super long lives. And, don't hold me to this, but I do remember reading somewhere that the goji berry has the highest natural content of HGH in any food that you can get. And human growth hormone is what, that's like the fountain of youth. So that would, follow logically that if these people who are eating this all day and it has the highest content of that they might live a long time.
There you go.
Anyway, goji berries.
Goji.
See what we get into, man. People really just need to tune in because they're going to learn about nutrition.
Yeah.
Pieces of ice smashing into the earth.
I'm gonna have to Google goji berries here.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah, it wouldn't do you much good eating your goji berries if the ice is if you were encased in ice.
Exactly.
But anyway, wouldn't matter.
You can add that to your morning oatmeal. You're going to have raspberries, blueberries, bananas, and goji berry.
You making fun of my breakfast now?
No, actually, it's quite delicious. So, last thing I'll say on the food time, and then we'll move on. For anyone who wants to try a delicious breakfast, it's raw oatmeal, a little bit of apple juice, right? And some fresh
to make it.
berries,
Yeah, I pour apple juice in
berries,
it, right?
sprinkle some chia seeds on it. What else?
Yeah, and blueberries, whatever fruit you can find. Strawberries when they're in season. I always try to put a banana on it every time.
All right.
Yep. Yep.
There you go, folks. The Messi Gents Breakfast of Champions.
Hey, I like it.
All right. Okay, so let's get back on track here.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's get to Enoch. And I did mention that when you went past it, and that's in verse 23. He lived 365 years. He walked with God, and then he was no more because God took him away. And Enoch is an interesting fella. If you turn in your Bible to Jude, and guess how many Judes there were?
One.
Yeah. And his real name was Judas, but he changed it. I don't blame him. But and if you go to Jude chapter 1 and verse 14, it says Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied. I think we've read this before about these men. See, the Lord is coming with thousands upon thousands of his holy ones to judge everyone and to convict all the ungodly of the ungodly acts they have done in the ungodly way, and of all the harsh words ungodly sinners have spoken against him. So what's interesting is this is the Enoch that we're reading about. Okay. And he wrote a book. All right. And it's not in our Bible. They tell me that it was at one time in our Bible, years and years and centuries ago, I guess now.
And why did it get taken out?
Yeah. Good question. I don't know. It's a weird book. I mean, I've read it. One thing about it is what's interesting about Enoch in that book of his is that Jude, read it. He obviously read the book because he's quoting from it, and the book had enough validity that it's in our Bible, right? I mean, at least the part that Jude quoted. Right.
So yeah, that's what I mentioned this before, but that's what's called a biblically endorsed extra biblical text. So the Bible talks about this book. So it's an endorsement from the people in the Bible.
Yep.
But it's not part of the canon.
Right. Yeah. Because the powers that be left it out.
Before we get to, because I want to talk about that, there are a lot of people who be like, oh, if you read anything outside of the Bible, you're adding to it, and then they'll point to verses where it says, don't add or take away from the Bible.
Yeah.
And what do you think about that as it pertains to, let's say, the book of Enoch?
Okay. Well, first of all, that verse that says don't add or take away doesn't apply to the Bible. Although I agree with that we should not be adding or taking away from the Bible. But that quote is really about one book, and that's the book of Revelation.
Okay.
Yeah, it's only in that book. Okay. So because it's at the end, people have a tendency to apply that to the whole scriptures. But I think it's true about scriptures that we shouldn't be adding or taking away from, but I think that verse gets taken out of context.
Okay.
But Well, the New Testament, I mean, just in books that were written about Jesus, I can't remember which one spoke about it, but he said, I suppose that of all the books in the world, of all the books, there wouldn't be enough to talk about Jesus, so I think there's been a lot of books that have been written,
Yep.
and have been lost, or have been discarded for whatever reason. But I'm sure there's more that was written about this whole story that we don't have. But it doesn't mean that what we do have isn't enough. But I'm sure there was more. So I think the biggest thing about reading other books is there could be a big danger. If I'm not a scholar on how things are written, for sure. And I don't have the ability to know a fraud from the real stuff. There are people that this is all they do, is study literature, and they have a sense of when things have been made up or added to or changed, because they're just experts in those areas. So when we head out on our own into other books that may or may not have been from godly men, it can mess up your
Right. It can change your whole view on everything. So one thing I'll say on that, where you said you're not an expert on that, um, it just made me think of something else you said before, where, the best way to recognize a fraud is not to study all the counterfeits. It's to study the real one and know that inside out. And so, I think that if you are studying the word and reading the Bible all the time and you know it, let's just say as well as you do, that you will be more able to identify something that goes against the word of God.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. They applied that to, like bank tellers.
Yeah. Well, it makes total sense. It's like, why study all the fake deals? Just study the real one. And if you know what the real one looks like, well, you'll be able to spot a fake, Right. But if all you're doing is studying all the fakes, you'll never know what the real one looks like.
No.
And then how do you know which one's real or not?
Right.
So I thought it was
Absolutely.
a great analogy you made. Anyway.
Yep. What's interesting about this book of Enoch is it does add in a lot of information prior to the flood, because that's when Enoch lived. And it does in that book, it does give an interesting story about Enoch. And I guess we could, since we're talking about him, to explain this verse. It says Enoch walked, in verse 24 of chapter 5 says, Enoch walked with God, then he was no more because God took him away. In the book of Enoch, it says that he would go and stay in the camp where God was. So whether it was angels that had a camp or a base that was outside of where the humans were, we read about angels having camps set up. Jacob, when he's coming back from Uncle Laban's and he's bringing his whole family back, he comes across a camp of God, of God's men, of angels. I mean, I don't get that, but there it is. So anyway, with Enoch, the story goes in the book of Enoch that he would go and he'd stay there. Like, let's say he would stay there a month, and then he would come back and he would preach to everybody. Okay. And well, then the next year he'd go and stay for 2 months, and then he would come back. I'm just making up these numbers, and then he would preach, well, every time he went back to be with the camp of God, he stayed longer until he was there. It was just flipped over. He would be there 10 months and then come back and preach for 2 months.
And just so everyone knows, you're just making these not like as an
The
example.
numbers up. Yeah, the point is that he went there and he started staying longer and longer and longer, and then he finally just didn't come back.
Right.
Yeah. So
To make a, I'm sure people will hang me out to dry on this one, but to make a comparison, isn't that kind of like Lord of the Rings where Frodo, he goes with them and he never comes back at the end?
okay, that must be it. That's it. That's where they got it from.
Yeah.
Yeah. I, Frodo. Yeah, that's got to be it. It's got to be Frodo. I was just looking at my notes here. Yeah, even if you, I got another note on Enoch, and that's in 1 Peter chapter 3.
Okay.
I'm sorry, 1 Peter. How many Peters are there? 2. Right?
Peters.
Yeah, 2 Peters, 3 Johns. Yeah, so this is 1 Peter 3:19. All right. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Boy, it's been a while since I read this, but yeah, let me read it here. Well, verse 18, for Christ died for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive by the Spirit. And then verse 19, through whom also he went and preached to the spirits in prison, okay, who disobeyed long ago when God waited patiently in the days of Noah while the ark was being built. What's interesting is about that little tidbit of information, it's only in the book of Enoch. So that tells you that Peter was also reading the book of Enoch. So anyway, just to throw that out there.
Yeah, and you can get the Book of Enoch today. You can go on Amazon and get it. I have a copy.
Yeah, but of course, there's lots of speculation about it. Whether it's authentic or not.
Right.
And all I'm saying is it is quoted in our scriptures, Bible scriptures that we have. 2 Peter 2 and verse 4. Yeah, same thing again. It says, for if God did not spare angels when they sinned, all right, but sent them to hell, putting them into gloomy dungeons to be held for judgment. If he did not spare the ancient world when he brought the flood on its ungodly people, but protected Noah, a preacher. Okay, so he's going all the way back to Genesis 6, which we're going to get into next time. And but he's also here again quoting Enoch about what God did and how he put them in these gloomy dungeons. There again, that's in the book of Enoch. I think there's one more, since I'm beating this horse a little bit. Back in Jude, I think Jude, I think I got it underlined. Yeah, here it is again. Verse 6 in Jude. And the angels who did not keep their positions of authority, but abandoned their own home. These he has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day. So there again, so Jude
Now,
and Peter obviously were.
Just because I'm a little familiar with Enoch, so is he talking about like was it Zemjaza or Azazel, the 20 angels that came down and started feeding information to men in the book of Enoch?
Yes, right. Yeah, and they made a pact. Yeah, yep. And we can get into that more when we do chapter 6.
Okay.
Because that's what led up to the flood was mankind had completely fallen, and these angels which we call demons or fallen angels, were leading the way for mankind. But anyway, let's get back to chapter 5.
So he's walking with God and he was no more.
Yeah, so he's walked with God and he was no more. And now he gave, his child was Methuselah, right? All right, what's interesting about Methuselah is Methuselah died when the flood began. Okay, so Methuselah lived all the way up until the flood, and then he died, and then the flood came. Interesting, isn't it?
God waited.
Yes, and he kept Methuselah alive that long, But so it's just interesting that Methuselah wasn't on the ark. God didn't put him on the ark, but he just took him. He allowed him to die. So that was interesting about Methuselah's death. And then this I skipped over Jared. Is it Jared?
Enoch.
Yeah, but there was a Jared, wasn't there?
Yep, and verse 18.
18.
And he's the one who begot Enoch.
Yeah, he's the father of Enoch. Yeah, he became the father of Enoch. I think there's a comment about Jared, and we're no, it's not Jared.
Okay.
It's Peleg. Peleg is the guy I'm thinking of. So we'll get into that later. But anyway, yeah. So I think that's about all I had on
Enoch.
One other thing on this book of Enoch, since it seems that we seem to be talking about this guy, the Dead Sea Scrolls, in Qumran, they've actually found fragments and pieces of the book of Enoch.
Now, is that when those kids, like that whole thing happened and they discovered the other stuff? Okay.
Found the book of Isaiah.
Yeah. Now, is this? Can you explain really quickly? What the dead, what all happened and the significance of that? Because I think a lot of people have heard, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and
yeah, and I'm not sure what year it was. I think it was in the 1930s, but it was when Jordan had control of that, what we call the West Bank. It had a huge influence in Israel, because obviously there weren't many Jews there, if any, in 1930. Yep. But anyway, so this Bedouin boy, which the Bedouins are like the nomads, the people that live in tents and don't belong to any country. This Bedouin boy was leading his father's sheep around and goats to eat grass, whatever, and he lost at least one, and so he's looking for it. So he saw this cave. Now where we are here, the Qumran area is where the Dead Sea is, and it's on the northern western side of the Dead Sea. Okay, so it's in Israel today. And anyway, he saw a cave, leaned over, threw some rocks in the cave to see if the goat or sheep or whatever would make some noise, and didn't hear any noise from an animal, but he heard something sound hollow. He knew something was different, and so he crawled down there and he found these clay jars, and inside the clay jars were fragments of words, written down, and so he grabbed. Well, the story goes that he burned some of them that night to stay warm. That's one thing. And then later he showed them to his father, like the next day when he went back. And then his father thought, well, you know what? We can sell these and make money in Jerusalem. So he tore them apart. Why sell them all when you can get as much money for one piece, right? And so this little boy went to Jerusalem to sell these to tourists or whoever might be interested in buying them. And somebody, and I want to think it was an American, I'm not sure. It's been a long time since I read the story, but thought that they looked remarkably original. And so he brought them back, I think, to the States, and they checked them out. And sure enough, they were the oldest copies of the Bible in the world. And so they went back to that area, and they've been digging there on and off ever since. One of the biggest finds so far, and they have a lot of big ones, but they found the pretty much complete, and might be complete, the whole book of Isaiah.
That's amazing.
It is. And there was a lot of doubters prior to those days that said, oh, the Bible we have today isn't accurate anymore. It's been copied so many times, it's been changed, and blah, 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 Well, what's interesting is our Bibles are word for word the same as this oldest manuscript that they found in the Qumran caves. So it's been very valuable.
And how old were those documents? Like thousands of years or what?
Well, they're at least 2,000 years old, because that's when they were hidden, was right. 2,000 years ago. And of course they had them before that.
Right.
So, they're ancient documents. One of them that they found was actually called a copper scroll. And it's pretty interesting. They took what they were writing down was so important that they actually etched it into copper. So they hammered out thin sheets of copper, and then they etched the words into the copper. Can you imagine the cost of something like that? But they didn't want, yeah. Oh, very smart. They didn't want them to be lost because they knew the paper would deteriorate, right? Whatever paper they had, papyrus, or I don't even know what they had back in the day. Right. But anyway, this copper one, when they got it all written and etched in, then they rolled it up. Okay. So like they always did with all the scrolls, so they rolled it up the same way. What they did, which was what was unique about it, is they rolled it up in clay. So they put clay in it, wet clay, and then they rolled it up. So when they found these copper scrolls, of course they're completely dirty, right? Well, then they dirt was all the way through it. And then the thought was, when they first had these, well, erosion and water over the years carried dirt inside them, right? And so they carefully washed them all out, cleaned them, and then they tried to open them up. Well, when they tried to open them up, they broke. They've been in a tight circle like this for thousands of years, and when they went like this, it would break. Well, everywhere it broke, they would lose those letters. And then they just kept breaking it, and they got the thing all apart. Well, then they had two of them. One of the researchers said, "What did we just do?" And they're like, "What?" He said, "The clay is in there so that when you break it, the letter is still on the clay, so you don't lose it." Isn't that something? So the second one, they didn't wash. They took it apart with the clay in it, and then they had every letter still in the clay, so they knew what they were. Something else, huh? Yeah, very, very smart people. But they credit the group called the Essenes with doing all this. And this group of Essenes, they were actually there in the Qumran area when Jesus was alive. You don't hear one mention of them in the New Testament, not one. And yet everything they have proves that they were there. They actually, the they were basically a group of zealots that came out of the temple because the temple was so corrupt. And so they went out there to the Dead Sea area to maintain the ways of God correctly. And so they preserved all of these manuscripts, and so they're still digging them up as we speak. What's interesting how they would do that is they would take a lot of these, they would take them into a cave, because there's a lot of natural caves, and they would put them at the back of the cave, and then they would fill the cave in with dirt and smooth it over. Well, how are you going to find that? You're not, because it just looks like a hill, you know. So anyway, smart guy.
I guess they just assume at some point, sometime, maybe thousands of years later, someone would discover it.
Yeah, and guess what? That's exactly what happened.
That's amazing. So, so I made you tell that story, and I forgot what we were talking about, how that tied in.
Well, because in these scrolls that they're finding, they found the Book of Enoch.
Okay.
And not complete, you know, they just found pieces of it.
Okay.
But it tells you again that even the Essenes, who were very zealous to do things correctly, you know, as far as biblical, godly ways, were reading the Book of Enoch.
So he was, it's pretty interesting because it sounds like he's a very revered guy, and boy, is he important, but yet there's about 2 or 3 verses here, and that's all you hear about him.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what, I think today what they're, the scholars, I think what they're leery of is that the Book of Enoch that we have today isn't the original.
Right. So while there may be some bits and pieces of truth, how do you?
Yeah, but it was compiled by somebody else later on,
right.
And you know, and that would make sense, because you think about it, you know, Enoch would have written his book 6,000 years ago.
Right.
There's nothing that's going to last that long, you know, nothing that they had, you know. So anyway, that's what makes the book is interesting, but probably what we have today is not what Jude was reading, or Peter was reading, or even the Essenes, what they were reading, other than these fragments which we have today, but they're just fragments.
And so then, so he had Methuselah, and Methuselah had Lamech, and then Lamech had Noah.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
So you were saying that Methuselah died just before the flood came?
Yep.
And so then was Lamech on the ship, on the ark?
No.
So he died before the flood too then?
Yep. He did. Well, I don't know, or else he died in the flood. You know, he may not have believed his son Noah. You know. Yeah. It doesn't mean that, hey, he was a godly man. You know, this Lamech.
Yeah. It's interesting what he says about his son, though. It says here in verse 28, it says, and he called his name Noah, saying, "This one will bring us rest from our work and from the toil of our hands, from the ground which Hashem had cursed." So then referencing a couple chapters earlier, what God does exactly that.
Yeah. So somehow it had been revealed to him that Noah was going to be instrumental in removing the turmoil that they were living in. You know, which again is recorded in the Book of Enoch. You know, about these giants. You know, chapter 6 talks about the giants that live there, and Enoch tells you a whole lot more about what life was like living with giants. So we'll get into that too when we get to chapter. I guess we're giving a bunch of teasers for everybody in chapter 6.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's about all I had on chapter 5.
Right. Well, that sounds good to me.
Yeah.
All right. Yep. So I guess the next one will be ping-ponging back over to Genesis. finishing chapter 2, and then we'll do another Q&A or maybe some prophecy stuff, and then keep trucking on. You know, we have an extra subscriber now. We have 21 subscribers.
Well, that's awesome. I don't know who you are, but I'm glad you're here. Hey, listen, you had that question on on Revelation about the 10 days. Remember they were going to suffer for 10 days?
I don't.
You already forgot your question.
Yeah.
Anyway, I did look that up.
Okay. Well, should we talk about it real quick?
Yeah, real simple. Nobody knows.
There you go.
Yeah, there's a lot of speculation, but and I read several articles that nobody really knows.
Okay.
Why he gave those 10 specific days for them to suffer.
Yeah.
No.
Well, on that note, this is Messi Gents signing off, and we'll see you next time.